The distress beacon had been broadcasting for 11 minutes before anyone answered. The White Meridian sat alone in neutral space, painted white from bow to stern, its hull marked with the blue cross of United Earth Medical Command, the same symbol every spacefaring civilization had agreed, in writing, meant hands off. The ship carried no rail guns, no missile tubes, no point defense arrays. It carried surgical bays, blood reserves, and 312 patients who could not walk on their own. Dr. Petra Solis was in the middle of a spinal reconstruction when the proximity alert sounded. She did not stop working. Alerts in neutral space were usually debris. Usually. It was Nurse Aldrich who checked the sensor board and went quiet in a way that made Petra's stomach drop. "Talk to me," she said, still holding the surgical frame. "Volkai 4 ships, combat configuration." She finished the suture. She always finished. By the time she reached the observation corridor, the 4 Volkai warships had arranged themselves in a semicircle around the White Meridian. They were sleek vessels, dark green hulls, angular like broken glass. Beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful. Captain Rail Das was on the comm already, broadcasting on every open frequency identification codes, medical registry numbers, the Neutral Space Treaty Article numbers 1 through 9. His voice was steady. He had done emergency broadcasts before, never like this. The Volkai did not respond on any channel. Fleet Commander Zarath watched the human ship from his command deck and felt nothing particular. He had read the intelligence reports. Humans were a minor species, spread thin, politically fragmented, not worth serious attention. Their territory bordered Dominion space in 3 places, and they had, in recent months, been operating medical vessels near Volkai patrol routes. His superiors called it a nuisance. Zarath called it an opportunity. He did not hate humans. He simply did not think they mattered enough to fear. He gave the order in the same tone. He used to request his morning meal. The first shot took out the White Meridian's communication array. The second and third hit the engine block. The ship went dark and began to drift. Then Zarath's gunners fired 4 more times, and the White Meridian stopped being a ship. Petra was thrown into a wall when the first explosion hit. She grabbed a handhold and held on while the corridor lights died and the emergency strips blinked red. She heard the hull screaming, a sound no one forgets, and then a section of ceiling came down, and she moved without thinking, ducking into a side access hatch that led to the escape pod bay. She pulled 3 people in with her, a medic named Dirk, an orderly whose name she would later learn was Cass, a patient, a young soldier with both legs in polymer casts who had been crawling down the corridor alone. She hit the release and the pod fired. Through the pod's small viewport she watched the White Meridian die. It did not explode all at once. It came apart in pieces, slow and quiet in the vacuum, each section tumbling in a different direction. She could see the surgical bay she had been standing in 40 seconds ago. She could see the ward where her patients were. Past tense now, all of it past tense. Dirk was saying something. She could not hear him. Her hand, moving on its own, found her personal recorder clipped to her coat pocket. She pressed record. She pointed it at the viewport. The Volkai ships did not pursue the escape pod. They were already leaving. Zarath had made his point, whatever point he believed he had made, and he had other routes to patrol. Petra kept the recorder running. She did not speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice came out very flat, the way voices do when the mind has gone ahead of the feelings. "This is Dr. Petra Solis, Chief Medical Officer, UEMC Hospital Ship White Meridian, registry number 77 Bravo Indigo 4. The date is March 14th. The time is 6:11. The White Meridian has been destroyed by Volkai Dominion warships in neutral space at coordinates I am transmitting now. The ship was unarmed and clearly marked under treaty protocol. We were broadcasting our identification continuously at the time of the attack." She paused. "Captain Rail Das did not make it to the pods. I don't think many people did." She lowered the recorder but did not turn it off. The soldier with the casts was gripping the seat frame very hard. Cass had her head down. Dirk was staring at nothing. Outside, the debris field caught the light of the distant star and glittered. Petra pressed herself against the cold wall of the pod and thought about the 312 patients. She thought about the ones who had been awake, who had known what was coming when the lights went out. She thought about the Volkai wounded that her team had been treating in Bay 4, 2 soldiers who had been injured in a different conflict entirely, given the same care as every human patient, who were dead now alongside the people who had saved their lives. She thought about what Earth would say when it heard this recording. She thought about what Earth would do. The pod drifted through the quiet dark, and Petra Solis said nothing more. She just kept the recorder running, pointed at the wreckage, making sure every frame was captured and every second was saved. Some things needed to be witnessed. The cargo hauler's steadfast margin found the escape pod by accident. Its pilot, a retired freight runner named Bowl, had been running a routine scan for salvageable materials when the pod's emergency beacon pinged. He almost ignored it. Salvage law was complicated near neutral space debris fields. Then he noticed the UEMC markings and changed course. He pulled 4 survivors aboard. One of them handed him a recording device the moment she stepped through the airlock, before she accepted water, before she sat down. "Get this to Earth Command," she said. "Don't copy it, don't broadcast it. Physical delivery or direct encrypted line only. Do you understand?" Bowl looked at this woman, white coat, blood on her sleeve, completely calm in the way people got when they had already processed the worst thing, and he understood that she was not being dramatic. "I understand," he said. The recording reached Earth in 71 hours. It sat on a desk in the United Earth Intelligence Directorate for 6 minutes, while the analyst who received it watched it 3 times in a row without moving. Then she picked up her secure line and called her supervisor. Her supervisor watched it once. He called the Security Council liaison. The liaison called the Secretary General's office. The Secretary General watched it and did not say anything for a long time. In those 6 hours, 3 things happened that most people never read about in the history files. The first was that Ambassador Gideon Ash, stationed at the Volkai diplomatic annex on Relay Station Ovum, received a recall code, not a letter, not a message, just a 5-character code that every Earth diplomat was trained to recognize as, "Leave immediately, take nothing you cannot carry, do not explain yourself." He was in a meeting with Volkai trade attachés when his wrist unit buzzed. He looked at it. He stood up. The Volkai attaché, a tall official named Drensal, asked if everything was all right. Gideon Ash put on his coat, picked up his case, and walked out. He did not answer. He did not look back. The second thing was that Admiral Nora Vance was pulled out of a training simulation at Fleet Command on Luna. She was handed a sealed reader. She read its contents standing in a corridor in her simulation gear, which was not how she had expected to learn that her career was about to permanently change. When she finished reading, she handed the reader back and said, "Get me a line to the council chamber." The third thing was that the White Meridian's full passenger manifest was cross-referenced against the survivor list. The survivor list had 4 names on it. The manifest had 316. The Security Council convened at 200 hours. There were no empty seats. Petra Solis testified via secure link from the Steadfast Margins medical bay, her arm newly bandaged, her voice unchanged from the recording, flat, precise, without performance. She answered every question. She described the attack in clinical detail, the way a doctor describes a wound, not with emotion but with accuracy, because accuracy matters when you are building a record. One council member asked if there was any possibility the Volkai had mistaken the White Meridian for a military vessel. Petra said the ship was broadcasting its registry codes for 11 minutes before the first shot. The identification markers were lit. The hull was white with a blue cross. There were Volkai patients in Bay 4. They would have known exactly what they were firing on. No further questions were asked. The vote was not close. It was not long. The chamber was quiet enough that people later said they could hear the ventilation system running. Unanimous. United Earth declared a state of total war against the Volkai Dominion at 3:47 hours, March 17th. There was no press release prepared in advance. There was no speech. The declaration was transmitted on diplomatic frequencies to every Volkai communication relay within range and to every neutral party monitoring station in the sector. Plain language, no preamble, no list of grievances, no demands, no grace period. Just we are at war. Admiral Vance was given command of the unified fleet response before the sun rose on Luna. She stood in the council chamber in the same simulation gear she had been wearing for 3 hours and listened to the briefing on available assets, current fleet positions, and estimated Volkai military strength. When the briefing officer finished, Vance asked her one question. Any engagement restrictions? The Secretary General looked at her across the table. He thought about the recording. He thought about the manifest. He thought about the 4 names on the survivor list against 316 on the other one. None, he said. Vance nodded. She turned to her aide, a young officer named Ferris who was doing an excellent job of pretending he was not afraid. Get a secure line to every shipyard director on the construction list, she said. Tell them we are moving to full activation. Everything in dry dock, everything on the assembly frame, everything that can be made flight-ready within 30 days. She started walking. And tell them not to sleep. Ferris fell into step behind her, already typing. In the Volkai diplomatic annex, the attaché named Drensal stared at the empty chair where Ambassador Ash had been sitting. He had been trying to reach Dominion High Command for 2 hours. No one was telling him anything useful, but the recall code meant something, and the silence from the human side of every diplomatic channel meant something, and Drensal was smart enough to put those 2 things together. He sent a private message to his family. Then he sat down and waited to find out what he had helped start. The Volkai intelligence report was confident, detailed, and wrong in almost every way that mattered. It said Earth maintained a standing fleet of 38 active warships. It said human shipbuilding was slow and expensive. It said the declaration of total war was almost certainly political theater, a response to domestic pressure, something that would cool within weeks and result in a negotiated settlement. The report cited 17 previous Earth diplomatic incidents as evidence of this pattern. It concluded that the Dominion should hold position, make no concessions, and wait. Fleet Commander Zarath read the report and felt reassured. Elder Council Speaker HFY read the same report and felt nothing of the kind. HFY was old enough to remember when Volkai intelligence had been confident about other things that turned out not to be true. He pulled separate files, not military, not intelligence, old academic research on human behavioral patterns in large-scale conflict. The work had been done by a Volkai sociologist 20 years earlier and largely ignored because it was not useful during peacetime. HFY read it in one sitting. The sociologist's conclusion had been simple. Humans were unusual among known spacefaring species because their response to catastrophic loss did not follow a cooling curve. Most civilizations, when struck hard enough, moved through anger into calculation. Humans, under specific conditions, particularly when they believed an act had been performed with deliberate cruelty against people who could not defend themselves, went in the opposite direction. They got more focused, more organized, more willing to absorb cost. The sociologist had described it as a threshold inversion. Past a certain point, humans stopped asking if they could win. They started asking only how. HFY quietly drafted a private message to 3 neutral party ambassadors, flagged it as personal correspondence, and did not tell the council he had sent it. He hoped he was wrong about the humans. He was not wrong. On day 8 after the declaration, the first of Earth's reserve shipyards came fully online. It had been sitting at 40% capacity for 11 years, officially listed as a maintenance and retrofit facility. Within 72 hours of activation, it was producing 2 warships every 6 days. By day 14, 6 more facilities had activated. These were not old ships being repaired. These were new hulls, built on frames that had been quietly pre-assembled and waiting. Earth had been doing this for 3 decades, not building a fleet, but building the capacity to build a fleet at speed, because Earth strategists had always understood that the first weeks of a major conflict would be decided by who could scale fastest. Lieutenant Orenfeld arrived at his new posting on day 16. He was 24 years old, weapons certified on 4 ship classes, and had never seen actual combat. He had volunteered for the Unified Fleet Response the morning after the war declaration, before he had even finished reading the full announcement. The Volkai patient records from Bay 4 had been included in the public release. 2 enemy soldiers, treated with the same care as humans, dead alongside the doctors who healed them. That detail had settled something in Oren that he could not explain in words. He stopped trying to explain it and focused on his assignment instead. The ship he boarded was the ISV Hammer Claws, a strike-class vessel, lean and fast, built for close-range engagement rather than long-distance bombardment. Its hull was not white. Its crew of 91 moved through the corridors with a particular kind of quiet purpose that Oren recognized from training as the behavior of people who had decided something and were no longer second-guessing it. He introduced himself to his section head, a veteran officer named Riss who had a prosthetic right hand and a habit of checking his weapon lock twice before speaking. "First deployment?" Riss asked. "Yes." "Good, you won't have anything bad to unlearn." The fleet assembled at the outer marker above the 6th planet of the Tennis system, a cold, uncolonized world that served as a rally point because it had no settlements to protect and 3 jump corridors leading toward Volkai territory. Ships arrived in groups of 4 and 6, took position in assigned sectors, and waited. On day 22, Admiral Vance arrived aboard her command ship. She made no speech. She transmitted 1 line of text to every ship in the formation. "Count your vessels." The reply came back in 3 minutes. 467 ships, more than 10 times what Volkai intelligence believed Earth could deploy. Orenfeld was in the observation bay when the count was announced. He had been there for an hour watching ships arrive. He had stopped counting at 60 because the number had stopped feeling like a number and started feeling like something else, like a statement. Like an answer to a question the Volkai had asked when they fired the first shot. He thought about the White Meridian, about the 312, about the fact that somewhere in this fleet, Petra Solis was aboard a support vessel as a civilian advisor, and she had agreed to come because she said someone who was there should be there at the end. He understood that. On the Volkai border, 17 monitoring stations registered the incoming contacts simultaneously. The automated alert system triggered across 12 Dominion patrol ships, which relayed the contact report up the chain to Zareth's new flagship. The sensor officer read the count aloud. Zareth made him read it a second time. Then a third. The number did not change. 467 human warships, moving in total silence toward the border, at a speed that suggested they had no intention of stopping. Zareth expected them to come for blood first. Every military doctrine he had ever studied said the same thing. When a civilization declares total war, it strikes at population centers, government infrastructure, symbolic targets. The goal is fear. Destabilize the civilian core, shatter confidence, and the military machine loses its foundation. It was how the Volkai fought. It was how every species the Dominion had ever faced had fought. He had positioned his defense fleet accordingly, deep formations protecting the homeworld and the three primary colony systems. Heavy guns pointed outward, waiting. Admiral Vance did not go for the homeworld. She went for the pipes. The attack lasted 9 hours, 16 target groups, each one carefully selected over the preceding 3 weeks by Earth's Tactical Planning Division, people who had spent years studying Volkai logistics and found the shape of something that looked, from the outside, like a functioning military empire, but was actually a system held together by a surprisingly small number of physical connections. 12 resupply depots, 4 active shipyards, not the ones protecting the homeworld, but the secondary yards that produced replacement parts, ammunition, and fuel cells for forward-deployed fleets. Every communication relay within 4 light towers of the border. Every automated resupply drone platform. All 16 target groups were struck within the same 40-minute window. When it was over, the Volkai Dominion's forward military logistics network had effectively ceased to function. Ships at the border could still fight. They could not resupply. They could not get replacement parts. They could not communicate reliably with Homeworld Command. They had what was in their holds and nothing more. The hammer claws hit the relay station at Volkai Grid Point 7, which was the communications hub for the Dominion's entire northeastern patrol sector. 43 ships that would now be operating on stored orders and short-range radio for the foreseeable future. Ohrenfeld fired the shot that killed the station's transmitter array. A precise burst, 2 seconds, targeted to disable rather than destroy because Vance's orders had specified, disable, not demolish. They needed the stations intact for future use. They were not destroying Volkai infrastructure. They were taking it. He had trained for shots like this on simulation for 2 years. His hands did not shake. That surprised him slightly. What surprised him more was the silence after. No return fire. The station had no weapons. It was a communications platform, not a warship, and the 3 Volkai patrol ships assigned to protect it had already received emergency orders to fall back toward the homeworld. The station was simply abandoned. Riss walked past his station afterward and put a hand briefly on his shoulder. No words. Oren nodded. Across the entire strike operation, Earth lost 1 ship, the ISV Torden, a mid-weight vessel that moved into the wrong angle during a debris scatter and took hull damage that proved unrecoverable. 22 crew. Vance noted it in her log and gave the order to continue. Zareth understood what had happened by hour 3. By hour 9, when the full damage report was assembled, he sat with it for a long time and said nothing. His second-in-command, a career officer named Breath, laid out the situation plainly. The fleet could still fight, but fighting without resupply meant every engagement was drawing down a pool that could not be refilled. The humans had not tried to kill Volkai soldiers. They had tried to strand them. "They want us to run out," Breath said. Zareth looked at the star map. "Then we don't give them time. We attack now while we still have full loads." Breath said nothing. The silence said enough. Zareth committed 220 Dominion warships to a counterattack, targeting a region of open space between the border and the Tenna rally point. A corridor that human ships would have to pass through to resupply their own forward elements. He reasoned that if he could control that corridor, he could cut their supply lines the same way they had cut his. It was, strategically, the correct move. Vance had predicted it exactly. She had left the corridor open deliberately. The Dominion fleet moved in. The corridor's flanking positions, which had appeared empty on Volkai sensors, were not empty. Earth had parked 60 ships there 3 days earlier, engines cold, no active emissions, their hulls coated in a new material that ate radar returns like cloth soaking up water. The Dominion fleet walked into a 3-sided engagement at close range. The battle lasted less than 4 hours. Dominion ships fought hard. Zareth had capable officers and experienced gunners, but they had been maneuvering toward an objective, while the human ships had already been positioned for an encirclement. There is a difference between a force that is moving and a force that is waiting, and the difference showed. When it was over, 71 Volcae ships had been destroyed and 30 more had been disabled. Zarath's flagship had lost its port drive and was venting atmosphere from 2 decks. Breath was dead. On the support vessel Recavis, Dr. Petra Solis watched the engagement data feed with Ferris, who had been assigned to her as a liaison. She watched the numbers on the screen and did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "How many of their crew were on those disabled ships?" Ferris checked. "Estimate puts it around 4,000. "Are we recovering them?" Ferris looked at her. "That's not standard in active combat." "It should be," Petra said. She sent a formal request to Admiral Vance through the liaison channel. She cited the same treaty articles she had cited about the White Meridian, different purpose, same law, persons in distress in neutral or captured space. Vance received the message. She read it twice. Then she authorized 3 recovery ships to collect Volcae survivors from the disabled vessels. It was not mercy. It was something more complicated than that. It was a reminder from a doctor who had lost 312 patients that the point of this was not to become the thing that had fired on the White Meridian. Zarath received a transmission shortly after, not from Vance, from one of his own officers being held aboard a human recovery ship, alive, unharmed, receiving treatment for injuries. Zarath stared at the message for a long time. Then he opened a line to the Elder Council. HFY had been Elder Council Speaker for 19 years, and he had never once addressed the public without the Council's approval. He did it now anyway. He could feel the war collapsing inward the way old structures collapse, not all at once, but in the particular sequence where each failing part takes 2 more with it. The logistics network was gone. The forward fleet had lost 1/3 of its strength in a single engagement, and now the news about the Volcae survivors, 4,000 soldiers pulled from disabled ships, alive, treated, had reached the civilian population through channels DHA-Voss's office had not been able to stop. It was supposed to be damaging, proof that humans were playing with them, collecting prisoners to use later. That was how the Dominion's internal media had initially framed it. It had not landed that way. The families of those 4,000 soldiers had received confirmation that their people were alive. The reaction was not gratitude toward the Dominion war effort. It was questions. Why did the enemy bother? Why did the enemy treat them? What were they actually fighting for? DHA-Voss did not have good answers to those questions. What he had was the truth, and in his experience, the truth was the only thing that could sometimes slow a disaster. He released his statement on the public address network, bypassing the military communications blackout entirely. He said 3 things. First, that the destruction of the White Meridian had not been council policy. It had been the decision of one commander, acting on personal judgment, without authorization. Second, that Zarath had been removed from command effective immediately, pending full council review. Third, that DHA-Voss was personally requesting a communication channel with Earth authorities to discuss terms. The council was furious. Zarath was quietly placed under guard in his own quarters before he could respond publicly. The statement reached Admiral Vance on day 31. She read it on the bridge of her command ship, standing, which was how she read most things. She handed the reader back to Ferris. "Does he think this stops the operation?" she said. It was not really a question. Ferris said carefully, "He may be hopping." Vance looked at the star map. Forward elements are 12 hours from the Volcae secondary colony at Tereth Point. That colony has a military staging base and a population of about 800,000 civilians. She paused. "We are not hitting the civilian population. We are hitting the staging base. Make sure every ship commander understands the distinction and has reviewed the targeting constraints." "Yes, Admiral." and send a response to HFY. Tell him we acknowledge his message. Tell him that if he wants to discuss terms, he can start by delivering Zarath to us in person. Until that happens, the operation continues." The response was transmitted. HFY read it in his private office and sat with it for a long time. Meanwhile, Zarath was not as contained as the council believed. He still had loyalists. The guards assigned to his quarters were officers who had served under him for 8 years, who believed that what he had done to the White Meridian was a hard call but a defensible one, that humans had been encroaching on Dominion space, and someone had needed to send a message. They let him access a secondary communication terminal. He did not contact the press. He contacted the 12 Dominion warships that had avoided destruction in the corridor battle, the remnant of his forward fleet, currently holding position at the edge of the Tereth Point system. Their commanders were loyal to him personally, not to the council. He told them to make a run at the human supply line, not a full engagement, a high-speed strike against the 3 Earth resupply vessels that had been identified running fuel and ammunition to the forward fleet. Kill the support ships, slow the human advance, buy the council time to negotiate from a slightly stronger position. He told them it would work. It did not work. Vance had not left her supply ships unprotected. The 12 Dominion vessels came out of their approach fast and found themselves looking at a response screen of 22 human warships that had been running silent escort for the past 4 days. The engagement was brief. Not clean, 3 human ships took significant damage and 1 Dominion vessel managed a ramming run that destroyed itself and 1 Earth escort in the same moment, but brief. 8 Dominion ships were destroyed. 4 surrendered. The supply chain was untouched. Orenfeld was in 2 of the closest exchanges his ship had been in so far. 1 shot came near enough to the hammer claws that the impact shockwave cracked 2 corridor panels and sent him into a wall hard enough to bruise 3 ribs. He filed a brief injury report, got taped up by the medic, and was back at his station inside 20 minutes. Riss found him there afterward and said nothing, which Oren had learned was how Riss expressed that he had been worried. "I'm fine," Oren said. "I know," Riss said. "You're going to keep saying that until you're not, and then you'll say it twice as loud." That was as close to a caring conversation as Riss ever got, and Oren appreciated it. The news of the failed strike reached the Elder Council before it reached Zarath. When he finally heard it from a guard who had decided the loyalty had limits, he sat down on the edge of his bunk and did not move for a long time. He had been so certain that humans would stop, that they would reach a point where the cost calculation shifted, where the sensible choice was a ceasefire. That was what civilizations did. They fought to a useful stopping point and then they negotiated. He had never really considered that humans might not be looking for a stopping point, that they had crossed a threshold he had not recognized, and on the other side of that threshold, the math worked differently. The council stripped his rank at 1400 hours on day 32. At 1600 hours, Zarath transmitted a ceasefire offer to Admiral Vance's flagship, from a personal terminal in his own name, without council authorization. She did not respond for 11 hours. When his unit pinged with an incoming message, he opened it immediately. It said, "Surrender is not a ceasefire. Send Zarath to us. Then we talk." He stared at it for a very long time. There was a knock at his door. The council guards had changed shift. These ones had different faces and different instructions. They were there to take him somewhere. Zarath arrived aboard the Earth carrier Resolute Margin in a transport with no weapons and a single council guard, which was the Dominion's way of saying, "Here, take him. We are done with this." He was placed in a holding room that was clean, well-lit, and had a window with a view of open space. No cell, no chains. He had expected something darker. He was not sure if the lack of theater was better or worse. The war formally ended on day 61. Not with a battle, with paperwork transmitted across a closed diplomatic channel while both sides' fleets held position and did nothing. The Volcae Elder Council, led by HFY, transmitted an instrument of total surrender with all 17 council signatures attached. Earth's Secretary General signed the acceptance in the same room where the war vote had been taken 61 days earlier, at a table with one extra chair that had been left empty and was labeled with a small placard bearing the name, White Meridian. Nobody asked whose idea that was. Nobody needed to. Ambassador Gideon Ash led the peace negotiation. He had not spoken to a Volcae official since the morning he walked out of the diplomatic annex. He arrived at the neutral station where talks were held in a plain gray suit, sat across from HFY, and opened his case. He did not begin with pleasantries. He did not begin with anger. He began by placing the full list of terms on the table and saying, "These are not negotiable in scope. Some details can be discussed." The terms were not designed to break the Volcae dominion. They were designed to prevent it from doing this again. Military restructuring, independent oversight of armed forces, mandatory participation in the Neutral Space Protection Treaty that the Dominion had technically signed 7 years earlier and largely ignored. A formal reparations schedule, not a punishing one, but a real one, payable over 12 years, directed specifically to the families of the White Meridian dead, and to a permanent fund for neutral space medical vessels. There was one additional term that was not about money or military structure. Before the signing, HFY was required to read aloud on the record, transmitted live on open frequencies, every name on the White Meridian's final manifest, all 312 of them. Captain Rail Das first. HFY had read the list in private to prepare. It had taken him 22 minutes. Doing it in public with the feed running took 31 minutes because his voice failed him twice and he had to stop. He did not ask to skip any names. When he finished, the chamber was quiet for a full minute before anyone spoke. Petra Solis was present as an Earth civilian witness. She sat in the back row. She had not slept well in 61 days. She had not been able to, but she sat straight and she watched HFY read every name and she did not look away. Afterward, a Volcae junior diplomat, young, newly assigned, a background figure who had spent most of the summit carrying files and standing near walls, wrote a single line in his personal log that would not become public for 30 years. When historians began compiling the first serious accounts of what was later called the 61-Day War. He wrote, "I always thought the stories about humans were exaggerated. I was wrong. What frightens me most is not that they fought so hard, it is that they stopped." He meant it as a warning about what humans were capable of. Later readers decided it was a compliment. Both interpretations were probably right. Zarath stood trial at the Earth-Volcae Joint Tribunal, a new body created specifically by the peace terms. The evidence was simple and complete: Petra's recording, the ship's automated logs recovered from the debris field, and the testimony of the 3 other survivors. The trial lasted 6 days. The verdict was unanimous. He received a sentence of permanent removal from military service and 40 years of supervised detention in a Volcae civilian correctional facility, not on Earth, not in an Earth prison, but under Earth monitoring and with right of inspection. HFY had suggested this arrangement. He said it was important that the Dominion itself hold its own officer accountable in a Dominion institution. Earth had agreed, cautiously. Whether that worked the way it was supposed to was a question for the next 40 years. Orenfeld walked off the Hammer Claws on day 63, 2 days after the signing, when the fleet began its return to Earth staging positions. He had 3 cracked ribs, a partial hearing loss in his left ear from the close-range engagement in the supply corridor, and a collection of small scars that a medic had described as character. He found a quiet spot on the loading platform and called his family. His mother answered on the second ring. He asked about home. She talked for a long time, small things, normal things, the kind of things that happen when someone has been away for 2 months and life has kept going without them. He listened to all of it. When she finally asked how he was, he said he was fine, which was partially true and partially not, and would take some time to sort out completely. He stayed on the platform after the call ended. He sat on the edge of a cargo ramp and watched the sky, which from his position was full of stars and the distant shapes of ships moving to assigned orbits. Ships that had, 61 days ago, looked at 467 of their own kind assembled in silence and understood what that meant. He thought about the names HFY had read. He had watched the feed from his bunk the night before departure, all 31 minutes of it. He thought about Petrosolis sitting in the back of that chamber, and what it cost a person to hold themselves together that long for a reason that mattered. He thought about the 4 Voakai crew members recovered after the supply corridor battle, alive, treated, now on their way home under the prisoner exchange clause of the peace terms. He had not expected to care about that. He had found, unexpectedly, that he did. The stars did not offer any conclusions. They were just stars. He sat there until the platform crew needed the ramp. Then he stood up, picked up his bag, and went to find his next assignment. The war was over. That was the thing about wars eventually. They ended. What came after was the harder part, and it took longer, and nobody gave you a manifest for it. Just a direction to walk in, and the reasonable hope that it led somewhere worth going.